here with Lacey and Stephanie to talk about the staff empowerment domain. Lacey, do you want to go ahead and get started giving us an overview of what staff empowerment is all about?
Sure, Keith. Staff empowerment is really one of the aspects or domains of Peak that really supports resident choice. So the real purpose of the things that come under resident choice are all about supporting resident decisions as close to the resident as possible. So we need to empower direct care staff in order to accomplish that. Direct caregivers really know the residents, and they're right there with residents on a daily basis, listening to preferences, listening to what residents want to do, how residents tick, essentially. And so they're likely the first people to hear about something that a resident wants, needs, or desires. And so it's going to be important to empower direct caregivers to act on those things right away rather than having to run decisions up a flagpole. And what I mean by that is the idea of centralized decision making. So centralized decision making really epitomizes an organization where the person at the top makes the major decisions and then funnels it down to people. And direct caregivers would be kind of the last people to hear about things if that were the model that we were using, but yet they're the individuals that residents go to when they really need something, because they have relationships with residents. So we need to begin to decentralize decision making so that the decisions begin happening as close to the residents as possible. So in order to do that, direct care staff really need to understand that they're expected to support residents in their decisions, and that they know when they do support those decisions that they're going to be supported by leaders in the organization in doing that. Direct caregivers also need to know what's expected of them in terms of supporting residents in their choices, and what things are things that I should handle on the spot and are basic sorts of decision-making things, and what things do I need to involve others in that might involve more discussion to be able to support the resident in that, so they can discern some judgment there. Also, staff need to have access to information that's necessary to support residents' decisions and have the training to do these sorts of things. Also, for staff truly to feel empowered, they need to feel like they're important, valued, and involved in things. So this would include things like professional development opportunities.
Well, so within the staff empowerment domain, there's 4 cores, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, the first one is relationships. Do you want to talk a little bit about specifically what relationships?
Yes, absolutely. Relationships, the major goal for this particular core is that residents enjoy meaningful relationships with the people who are caring for them. And this is where consistent staffing falls, and it's really a fundamental piece of providing person-centered care. So I encourage homes that are getting started with Peak, if you're just getting into the program and starting from the beginning of this process, is to consider doing this early on in the process, as it really affects and influences the other cores and the ability to accomplish those things. And consistent staffing has had a lot of different definitions attached to it and notions of what it is. And so, of course, with Peak 2.0, the criteria really spells out what does it mean in the context of Peak 2.0 and how would I accomplish that. So that's what I want to go over next. And it really starts with the first supporting practice of getting small. And what we mean by that is we've got to move away from having 60 or 80 residents living in a space, and I as a direct caregiver might care for any one of those 80 individuals on any given day. We need to get smaller so that we can really get to know somebody well. Because it's better to really know a lot about somebody if we're caring for them rather than a little bit about a lot of different people. So the idea of getting small starts with defining small work areas. And when we say small work areas, we mean less than 30. The criteria specifically says no more than 30. So 30 or less would fit within this particular criteria. And then each of these work areas that are defined would be equipped with the right supplies and so forth for direct caregivers to do their job. So an example of getting small might be if you had a home that had 60 residents living there, and there were 3 halls in that home. One way to distinguish or define those work areas might be to call each hall a work area, and each hall might have 20 residents living there. And so each hall with 20 residents would be considered a smaller work area. Okay. Then from there, once you got these work areas defined, that's when we staff those areas. So each work area then would be staffed by particular groups of staff members, and they would be stationed in that work area for their work. So the second supporting practice really gets at this consistent staffing. So the criteria says that homes are required to have a staff schedule for each work area, and that they assign staff to a defined work area. Then in this particular criteria, there are 4 other pieces where homes need to make sure that they meet at least 2 of the 4 things. So the four things are versatile workers being in place, that PRN staff are assigned to a specific work area, no agency staffing, and there's no scheduled rotation in between work areas. So what we mean by no scheduled rotation is it's not customary practice in the home to hire somebody for one unit and then every couple weeks rotate to another work area, or alternate shifts every time they work, things like that. But they're really stationed and work directly out of one work area primarily. Now, we all know that there are times that there are emergencies, people get sick, or they might have accidents or things like that, and it creates a coverage crisis. And so in that situation, we would expect that the whole organization pitch in and help, but on a regular basis, there's no scheduled rotation. Versatile workers is really one way that when we get small, that we can truly accomplish some of what we need to do when we get small. When we decentralize our decision making, the more skills and knowledge that each person has, the better able we are to respond to residents' choices. So you might be able to help someone get dressed. You also might be able to give them a bath. You also might be able to prepare their breakfast for them, or get their medications for them if you have the skills to do that. And then the person sees one face consistently all the way through those tasks and activities. So versatile workers is one area, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we cover career development later. No scheduled agency staff is another component, and remember that you need to at least meet 2 of the 4. So I know that rural homes in western Kansas have difficulty finding the manpower to hire people on, and so they may use agency staff more routinely. And so if that's something that is just not accomplishable for your home, focus on some of the other areas. But in other cases, it may be that we rely on agency staffing when we do have a pool of people to hire from. So we encourage homes to tackle that then. And then PRN staff, we want to hire on PRN staff for each work area rather than having a big pool of PRN staff that can meet the needs of all of the work areas, because then they can really get to know the people in that work area when they come in.
Thank you. I think that gives a wonderful explanation of the first core, relationships. Steph, the second core is decision-making resident care. Can you tell me a little bit about what that entails?
Okay. This really ties to the ability of staff members to come together as a team and help to support the decisions that the residents are making for their own lives. And we often talk about needing to empower staff to be able to meet the choices that residents make for themselves, but we have to remember that we need to make sure staff are prepared to support residents when they make decisions, specifically when they make decisions that we might see as risky or not in their best interest. So we can't just tell staff all of a sudden one day, okay, go support resident choice. we need to, as an organization, have some conversations around how do we feel about risk as it relates to person-centered care principles? What level of risk are we comfortable with? How do we teach our team members what level of risk we're comfortable with and how they can make those decisions? And as an individual organization, each organization needs to create its own framework to help staff to make some of those decisions so that on the spot, when they're approached with something, they at least have some go-to questions in their mind to start figuring out what the answer should be, or at least have some sort of a process to begin to work through so it's not coming at them out of nowhere. Another piece of this is that the organization really needs to be prepared to support staff members when they're making decisions using these frameworks. It's one thing to say, yes, we want you to support resident choices, and it's a whole nother thing to actually support people when they are helping to support the choices that residents are making. So creating that decision-making framework for staff and making sure that all staff members understand how the principles of person-centered care and risk work together, and then having some key things in place. For example, things related to what if a resident wants to do something that goes against a doctor's order? What's the process for dealing with that? What if a choice a resident wants to make puts them in danger or puts someone else in the organization in danger? Just making sure we've really thought through some of these scenarios so staff are prepared to handle those. Staff certainly will need to know that it's important to be able to provide alternative options to see if that might be something that the resident is interested in. And then if the resident doesn't want one of those alternatives, then staff need to be prepared to have conversations with them about the potential outcomes of the choice that they're wanting to make. And there are going to be various different situations, so it's important to make sure that you've talked through a variety of things. For example, I might be very comfortable with a direct care staff member giving a resident who's diabetic a slice of pie and then going to the nurse after to let them know so that they can monitor blood sugars later. Or I might be comfortable with a direct care staff member visiting with a resident and the resident says, I don't want to eat breakfast today, and accommodating that choice right on the spot and then communicating with other team members to say, hey, we might want to offer this person a snack later. But I might not be so comfortable with a direct care staff member serving a great big hunk of steak to someone we know is at risk for choking. I might feel more comfortable in that situation if they spoke to the nurse about it before actually providing that steak. So making sure staff members know what kinds of things they can handle in the moment on their own and then talk to other people about it later versus the kinds of things that they really do need to reach out to someone else on the team for support for. The key with this is the answer can't immediately be no. If we really are wanting to value choice and support choice in residents, we have to come up with solutions so that no isn't the answer, but staff know how to determine what the appropriate answer should be.
And one of the things that is available at with the PEAK team is some resources about developing training for your home, because each home should develop their own training based on organizational policies that are in place and maybe even corporate structures or board approval kinds of things. And so the PEAK team has some resources to help guide people through what questions to ask yourself and what framework can be set up for a training.
I think it's important to note here too, if there's a decision that a resident makes on a routine basis that maybe we think might not be in their best interest, but it's something they clearly like to do or something that's clearly important to them, that we not give them a little mini lecture over what the potential consequences of eating that pie or smoking that cigarette or whatever it may be. So we have those conversations and we make note in their care plan that we've had those conversations, and we revisit those conversations occasionally, but that we're not constantly on that person about the decision that they're making. The next supportive practice in this area gets at the idea of staff members having the resources and information they need. We can't expect people to be able to support resident choice if the resources aren't there to do their job and if they don't have the information that they need. For example, if a direct care worker never has the opportunity to look at a person's care plan or to look at what a person's preferences are, how are they ever supposed to help that person carry out those wishes and live the life that they want to live? So we need to create systems that give the persons who need that information and those resources the things that they need to do their job effectively. One of the things that often comes up is if a resident needs money for something or transportation and it's not during the Monday through Friday 8 to 5, often staff report that they don't have access to transportation. They don't have access to any financial resources to be able to support the resident in that choice. So what kinds of systems do you have in place to make sure that if you're not there or the business office manager isn't there or there isn't another of the department head type persons in place, that they can still accommodate those choices that residents make? And each individual home is going to have a very different way that they want to handle those things, but conversations about how that looks and practices to support that need to be put in place in the organization.
Well, thanks, Ed. So the second core that you just discussed was decision-making resident care, but the third core is decision-making staff work. So how do those differentiate from one another?
Okay, well, this one is really about staff members having some opportunity to have some choice and some empowerment to make decisions about the work that they're doing on a daily basis. We've long looked at the staffing structure in nursing homes as kind of a hierarchy with the administrator and the other leadership team members at the top of that, and then the direct care workers toward the bottom of that pyramid, with everyone above them kind of making decisions about what their work looks like. And what we're looking for in Peak is where that's really kind of flipped around, where the direct care workers who really know the work that needs to be done and they know what residents want are the ones making the decision about what that work looks like. So, for example, the first supporting practice here is related to scheduling. So instead of having a scheduling person or the charge nurse or the director of nursing developing the staff schedule and posting that, we're looking for involvement by all of the direct care workers in figuring out what that schedule looks like. So for this one, it can be one of two ways. The first is that direct care staff do self-scheduling. So they work together as a team, knowing how many staffing hours are needed in their particular work area, and figure out who's going to cover which portions of those schedules to make sure that all the time's covered. Or the other option is that there might still be someone else handling the actual scheduling, but the direct care workers are very involved in that process, meaning they put in requests for the times that they would like to work. They coordinate with one another when they need time off or if there are gaps that need to be filled in the schedule. But that way they have a real hand in determining what their work schedule looks like. The other piece of this relates to hiring and orientation. What we really want to see with Peak is that direct care workers are helping or are very much a part of the process for hiring new caregivers into their work units or their work areas. And for caregivers to be able to do that, they really need to have a solid understanding of what the organization's hiring practices are. They need to have some knowledge of human resource laws to know what kinds of questions they can ask in interviews, what kinds of information they're allowed to gather to determine if a person would be a good fit for their unit. Then we'd like to see those caregivers involved in that interview process and really involved in helping to make the selection of who will join their team. What we find is that when direct caregivers are given this opportunity to help hire in their peers, they tend to find people who actually end up being a better fit in that work unit than when someone outside of the unit makes all of those decisions, because they know what the needs are, they already know what the strengths and weaknesses of other people on the team are, so they can really kind of help fill in those gaps. But that can't happen unless the organization puts the time and effort into making sure they're prepared to serve in that role. And then the last piece relates to leadership. And quite often in a traditional nursing home structure, the leadership team is made up of the administrator, the director of nursing, and the other department heads. And they do much of the decision making about what happens in the organization in that team. And what we're really looking for is involvement of direct care staff in that leadership team, both at the whole organization level, but then also involvement of direct care workers on the leadership teams of the individual work units that they're in. Anytime that there are decisions to be made about the organization, direct care staff should be a part of those decisions, because all of those decisions are ultimately going to affect their experience as a worker and their ability to be able to be attentive to the needs of residents.
Thank you very much. The last core, core 4, is career development. So, Lacey, can you speak a little bit about what the PEAK criteria details in career development?
Yeah, sure. This is one of the more clear-cut cores in the program. So it's kind of spelled out pretty clearly here. But the real idea here is when we talk about staff development or staff empowerment, we're talking about investing in people and making people feel valued. And this is really an opportunity to do that in a different way by supporting growth, individual growth of people. So the first supporting practice is having avenues for professional development in place. So it might be a formal career ladder that spells out how people can acquire different licensure patterns or promotion tracks within the organization, or it can also be skills enhancement programs. So we want to move just beyond the opportunity for direct caregivers to get things paid for, like to get a certification paid for and so forth, but also to help people really develop their skills in the organization. So if we think about versatile workers, that's really about enhancing direct caregivers' skills overall and making them a more well-rounded worker. And so that would be an opportunity to formalize what you're doing with that portion of it, the versatile worker portion. To really formalize that in place so that employees know that those things are available, and that what's available can be individualized to what interests them. And then a direct caregiver who's a really good direct caregiver could be promoted within the organization without becoming something different than a direct caregiver. So there might be opportunities for leadership in the organization or acquiring new skills and be promoted as well. So there are two different options there, either having that formal career ladder in place or having a specified skills enhancement program that's specified to a point that you could talk to a direct caregiver about those options and what it looks like for them. Then the second supporting practice is the outside education. And here we're focusing on staff members in the organization that are not managers. So a good rule of thumb with this is to think of anybody who has director in front of their name or manager as a part of what they do. We're not talking about those folks. So we're looking at least 10% of non-managerial staff getting education outside the organization. These could be a variety of different things. We could send people off-site to these trainings. You could also bring someone who's not on your in payroll in your building to come and present in your home to a group of people. You could also do webinar type of instruction. The thing that wouldn't fit here is normal kind of in-service training that are self-paced trainings, things like Silverchair and Relias. Those would not be considered outside education for the purposes of PEAK. So the attendance for this must be tracked so that you can demonstrate that, so a home can demonstrate that they've achieved this, and really distinguishing who's management staff and who's non-management staff.
Well, it seems like all of the cores in this domain are very difficult, but yet very key and necessary in order to be successful for the rest of the peak process with the rest of the criteria.
One of the things we've noted, Heath, in our work with PEAK from the beginning is that staff empowerment in relationship to the Kansas Culture Change Instrument that people filled out starting out, and in our work within homes going out on site visits, is this is an area of growth for our state. Resident choice has been an area where homes have really grabbed onto and done some good work with, but staff empowerment's an area where we could grow as a state in.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to explain this second domain, staff empowerment.